Hey guys, thank you very much for tuning into my channel and for inviting me into your homes. I hope that you guys will stick around for this video straight to the end, because it's something I feel everyone needs to know. It's something everyone needs to identify with. We will be talking about recruitment of cults, how cults recruit people. And cult is not necessarily something satanic. It just means it demonstrates a high level of devotion to a religious cause. And I hope that you guys will enjoy the video, and after that I will give you my commentary and what I think about it. Enjoy.
Not all cults are religious. Some are political, therapy-based, focused on self-improvement, or otherwise. And on the flip side, not all new religions are what we're referring to as cults. So what exactly defines our modern understanding of cults? And why do people join them? A typical cult requires a high level of commitment from its members and maintains a strict hierarchy, separating unsuspecting supporters and recruits from the inner workings. It claims to provide answers to life's biggest questions through its doctrine, along with the required recipe for change that shapes a new member into a true believer. And most importantly, it uses both formal and informal systems of influence and control to keep members obedient, with little tolerance for internal disagreement or external scrutiny. You might wonder whether some of these descriptions might also apply to established religions. In fact, the word cultus originally described people who cultivated the worship of certain gods by performing rituals and maintaining temples. But in time, it came to mean excessive devotion. Many religions began as cults, but integrated into the fabric of the larger society as they grew. Cults also demand obedience to human leaders, who tend to be highly persuasive people with authoritarian and narcissistic streaks. Leader uses personal charisma to attract initial followers. Further expansion works like a pyramid scheme, with earlier members recruiting new ones. Cults are skilled at knowing whom to target, often focusing on those new to an area, or who have recently undergone some personal or professional loss. Loneliness and a desire for meaning make one susceptible to friendly people offering community. The recruitment process can be subtle, sometimes taking months to establish a relationship. In fact, more than 2/3 of cult members are recruited by a friend, family member, or coworker, whose invitations are harder to refuse. Once in the cult, members are subjected to multiple forms of indoctrination. Some play on our natural inclination to mimic social behaviors or follow orders. Other methods may be more intense, using techniques of coercive persuasion involving guilt, shame, and fear. And in many cases, members may willingly submit out of desire to belong and to attain the promised rewards. The cult environment discourages critical thinking, making it hard to voice doubts when everyone around you is modeling absolute faith. The resulting internal conflict, known as cognitive dissonance, keeps you trapped, as each compromise makes it more painful to admit you've been deceived.
Okay guys, thank you very much for watching that with me, and I hope that we all picked up the same thing. I was very touched when I watched this video, and just these are things that I can identify with. Okay, so firstly, high level of commitment to its leaders. They said that in the beginning, and this is what happens in all, I think, all religions that we know, is that if you don't agree with the leader, there's a problem with you. Secondly, strict hierarchy. There's a way in which you go. There's a way, there's a level of people that you need to report to. Thirdly, they claim to provide answers to all the questions that you have. And I find this is something I find very amazing. Every cult that I've investigated, and I've investigated a lot of cults, guys, they all know where we come from. Secondly, they all know what our purpose on this life is. Thirdly, they all know where we are going. You'll be amazed at all of the stories of where we're going in the next life. And I think that if you've had missionaries or people from different churches coming to your home and trying to teach you about God, these three answers are always answered. Then we've got what shapes you there to get you to that promised reward. So the promised reward would always be where you're going. You never get a reward in this life. It's always where you're going. So then they'll tell you what you need to do in order to get where you are going. Then we've got don't allow internal disagreements or questioning your leaders. So if there is a problem with one of your leaders, you cannot question that, because whatever they say is right. Then demand obedience. Remember what I said, that they give you all the commandments on how to live, or they give you all the instructions on how to live because of where you're going as a promised reward. And then they have already pruned you on how to be obedient to those, because there's a reward that you are going for. Then we've got recruiting people in vulnerable states or transitioning stages. Now that is something my husband's going to go into, because I think that is very important. Once you understand what they look at when they come to you, then you'll be more aware of how to know whether it is by divine revelation or it is from God. Then we've got they instill guilt, shame, and fear on your current lifestyle. I think we've all had a lot of that. Every denomination that you go into, you are required to repent. Something else that is required with that repentance is for you to go and confess your sins. And you are being made felt so bad for how you are living your lifestyle. And that way, once you clear out all of those feelings about your current lifestyle, they are now able to let you on the right path, their path. Then do not allow critical thinking. This basically for me just means, so anything against the cult would be regarded as devil talk. So if you hear something about one of the leaders or anyone just in general that has a history in the church or a history in your religious sect, you can't bring it up. You can't bring it up around devoted people. You just need to be careful. And those are things that stood out to me, because I relate with those things. I know what they're talking about, and I know that everyone else can relate. Let me just give it over to my husband, because I want you guys to see the next video so that we can continue this conversation, okay?
All right. Thank you so very much for that, Pumi, my dearest wife. You did a phenomenal job explaining as to why people join cults and what frame of mind they are in when the recruiters, or in our case missionaries, actually come through our doors and actually recruit us, and how the process works. And also a little key indicators of what is a cult. Remember, not satanic, but an extreme level of devotion, not only to God, but to the leaders as well, and to the organization. So the next videos from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints with Al Whitney Clayton of the Presidency of the 70. Let's see what he has to say. Let's see if we can tie it in with what we just watched. Check it out.
Elders and sisters, I'm delighted to be here with you, and this is an exciting topic, and we're so happy to have this opportunity to talk with you about working with members, retention, and activations. Ye shall go forth. Do you see that part about ye? Mm-hmm. When we talk about finding, we want to make sure that we're talking about our own responsibility to find people to teach. We can help find people to teach when we develop the faith to do so. We need to develop the faith to find. We always find when we teach, and we teach when we find. What does that mean to you? How do you understand that? Any thoughts? Please, Elder Bigham.
I think always testifying, always looking for opportunities to share the gospel with, and when you do have someone you're teaching, always asking them for referrals or who they know that we can go and share this message with.
Good, thank you. If we're teaching someone, we constantly ask. We always look for opportunities to ask about who people know and who else do they know. The famous who else part, right? It's not enough just to ask who do you know. We always ask the second question, who else? And what's the third question?
Who else?
Who else? And the fourth, right? Yeah. We always do that. Thank you. Here's a mistake that's fairly common. It is that a missionary or a pair of missionaries show up at a member's home and they simply ask for a referral. There's a better way. We ask them questions that start with, who do you know? So we're going to complete that thought now by asking you to read these slides. Let's just ask Elder Von Dorsten, if you'd start. Will you read the first one underneath this, who do you know? And start what you read with who do you know, will you please?
Yes, sir. Who do you know who would be interested in and benefit from the gospel message?
Thank you. Elder?
Who do you know who has an illness in the family?
Next.
Who do you know who has recently moved?
Who do you know who recently had a baby?
Who do you know who recently had a death in the family?
Thank you.
Who do you know who recently changed jobs?
Why do you think that these kinds of questions might be more likely to be useful in working with an active member of the church and trying to find people to teach? Let me take you to Alma chapter 32, and we'll read a verse there. In Alma 32, you'll recall that Alma was teaching he was teaching the Zoramites, and as he was teaching, he ran into this situation. Someone came up behind him and asked this question. This is verse 5. He said, "What shall these my brethren do, for they are despised of all men because of their poverty, yea, more especially by our priests." And then going to the end of that verse, "What shall we do?" Verse 6, when Alma heard this, he turned him about, his face immediately towards him, and he beheld with great joy, for he beheld that their afflictions had truly humbled them, a point one of you made, and that they were in a preparation to hear the word. These kinds of questions help identify people who are in a preparation to hear the word.
So there you have it, folks. We just watched Elder Whitney Clayton of the Presidency of the 70. He's having to get together with a group of missionaries, trying to teach them to be more effective in the field of missionary work, trying to convert new members and retain. Now, he mentioned that the common mistake that missionaries make is that when they approach members and ask for a referral, all they do is simply ask for a referral. Something fell, we'll ignore that. But he says that is a mistake, but there is a better way. This is where it gets really interesting for me because it ties in with the previous video. He says then here are some of the questions that we need to ask. Because what this does is it helps categorize people in order for you then to be able to isolate your niche. This is my own commentary now. So some of those questions included, one, who would you know that would be interested in the gospel? We're familiar with that. Who would you know that has an illness? So that person's life is currently in turmoil and they are looking for something to escape the condition that they are currently in. Remember that. Recently moved. Now, a person who's new to a town or a particular area doesn't have a community. That particular person is isolated and has to some extent a degree of loneliness and is looking to join a community to feel some type of love, which is something that they most probably had where they came from. And then recently had a baby. This is somebody who's transitioning from daughterhood, sisterhood to motherhood. There's a lot of anxiety there because you love your child so much that you have high expectations. You're scared that you're probably going to mess up this kid's life. You are afraid of a lot of things and you feel like you cannot do this on your own, so you're more susceptible to a new idea that promises to relieve you of the anxiety of the current predicament, quote unquote, that you find yourself in. A death in the family. Now, you know with the gospel message what happens to people when they die, and particularly if they're family members. Isn't that something you would want to hear? So you are particularly vulnerable at that particular time. And then the climax, it quotes Alma, who's teaching the Zoramites. And Alma turns to this man who says, what are we going to do? We are despised. We are outcasts. We are on the skirts of society. And he says, listen, blessed are you because your afflictions have humbled you. And you are now prepared to receive the word. Now, Jim Jones had exactly the same approach. He never approached those that were well informed. He spent most of his time in the ghettos. He spent most of his time with those that were rejected and despised. He spent most of his time with those that were in the outer darkness of every society. And he had huge success, and he eventually became influential. These people who were members of Jim Jones's church would be able to testify even unto tears that Jim Jones and the ministry had changed their lives. They would tell you, look at my life now in comparison to what it was. Yes, they had a temporary moment of pleasure, a temporary moment of relief, a temporary moment of peace. It helped, but it had a tragic end. Now, brothers and sisters, if you and I cannot recognize between a cult, between something that comes from elsewhere other than from the Creator himself, because the Creator and boxes, I don't believe those things go hand in hand. If you are not in the details of things in order for you to be informed and you fall vulnerable to the predator, then that's your own fault. You are not going to blame the missionaries, whether they be Mormons, whether they be Presbyterian, whether they be Catholic. You are not going to blame the proselytes. Forget it. Because you and I did not care enough to get into the details of things in order for us to be informed. The welfare of our soul should be the primary priority, because our children are going to pick up where we left off. And if we wrong, brothers and sisters, and we miss the signs and we don't recognize cultism when we see it, and then we start believing in things that are not true just because they make us feel good and give us hope and a sense of purpose and answer our questions as to where we come from, why we're here, and where we're going, and we end up looking beyond the mark or going to where we're not supposed to go, we will be held accountable if we have been deceived. The same way that when lions hunt, when they hunt, brothers and sisters, just because the calf is young, just because the bull is old, it doesn't matter. It's going to fall victim. End of story. So, in closing, I will say, in which predicament were you in when you were approached?